Hey everybody, welcome to Startup Talk. This is John Jackson. You can call me JJ. So we're broadcasting from Cal State Fullerton in Fullerton, California. We're an internet-based radio station, and there are people all over the world listening. So I'm always conscious when I'm talking that somebody in Nigeria or Kuala Lumpur is listening, so I should be careful with the local references. So we're all about startups and learning what it means to start a startup, maybe to shut one down, to what it means to invest and advise, etc. My background is I'm a Silicon Valley guy, and I lived during the 80s and the 90s in the Valley. And from there, I went to Wall Street, and I learned about greed with a capital G. And on my third career now at Cal State Fullerton, teaching entrepreneurship, which is a major just like philosophy or accounting. We also have 2 incubators, and the incubators help young startups move forward, and that's really a lot of fun. And then a couple of years ago, I created an investment fund called Titan Angels LLC, which is an early stage and seed fund, and that kind of completes our ecosystem. So it's my pleasure to welcome our guest, Paul Wasserman. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Paul's going to tell a story about a company he created and ultimately sold. And so let's... the company was known as Ebates.
Ebates.com, correct?
Right.
Like rebates without the R.
There we go. So why did you do that?
It started at the time I was a prosecutor in San Mateo County at the district attorney's office. I'd been there for about 7 or 8 years and loved it, loved the job, but was always kind of a computer geek, if that's not a pejorative. I don't think it is anymore, but at some point in time it was. And I got into computers as a hobby when I was about 12, 13. I had my first Apple II computer. So I always loved technology. And here I was at the DA's office, and we were in the Silicon Valley. We're in San Mateo County, which is just north of San Jose, just south of San Francisco on the peninsula. And was running at the time, or just started the high technology prosecution unit at the DA's office, because we started getting cases referred to us from the police agencies that were technology related, and there was really nobody in the office that was
cyber crimes.
Yeah, it was pretty much what it ended up being was anything where the computer was the main instrumentality of the crime.
Okay.
So, or a primary piece of evidence. So, for instance, one of the early cases, I had a couple of early ones that were like murder for hire over the internet, where someone wanted to off their girlfriend. So
it happens,
It happens. It sadly happens more than you think. And he was using, at the time, Yahoo chat rooms to solicit hitmen.
Obviously a thinker.
Yeah. Well, you don't get the smart ones, as we say often. But that was one of the early ones. And then I had one that was a pretty groundbreaking one where Larry Ellison at Oracle Corporation was being, I guess you could say, extorted ultimately by a former girlfriend of his who was an employee who, after being terminated, broke into Oracle's computer network and sent an email to Larry under her boss's name saying that, Larry, I've terminated, Adeline was her name, Adeline Lee, per your request, and then used that to sue Ellison for wrongful termination and sexual harassment. And that ultimately went to trial. It was about a 3.5-week trial for computer network intrusion and fraud and all these type of things, and got a conviction. And she spent, I think, a year on that case. And then she also pointed a gun at somebody and spent 6 months concurrent to that. So no, it's consecutive. So she did a 1.5 years total on that. So I was always loved technology, and a good friend of mine at the office, Alessandro Isolani, was also a kind of a computer nerd as well. And we each had, during college, we each kind of started little ventures separate from each other. We didn't know each other in college, and we're like, here we are in the middle of the heat of the internet. It's taking off. This is 1998, and it really started to gain traction. This is before Google, before Facebook, before Twitter, before any of these things existed. It was basically Amazon, Yahoo, and a couple of other big plays. And we decided, let's see what we can come up with. And that's how that was the seed of the process that we ended up undergoing.
So what was the problem or the opportunity that you saw?
Well, so when we sat down to start knocking around ideas, and we would do it after work on the phone, and we spent months spinning ideas, we kind of wanted to, I think like any entrepreneur should do, is you want to identify and target the market. What market is it that you want to serve? The internet at the time, the primary focus was either what were called B2B or B2C plays, so business to business or business to consumer. We decided that the business to consumer market was probably going to be huge. At the time, it was fledgling.
Yeah. Pardon me. So this is like 1998?
98, correct.
Okay, right,
this is like mid-98. So Amazon is, I don't even know if they were selling product at the time, selling anything besides books at that point. I honestly don't remember. But online shopping was new, and it was something that we felt was really going to take hold, and the Valley was kind of excited about. So we decided, all right, let's look into that at least sector. That'll be the market we're looking for. And then as we kind of continued to refine it and work on the idea, we put other parameters. Like one of the big parameters we had going in was that it had to be something easy enough for our moms to use. That was a big thing for us because we figured mass market was our best chance. That we wanted a very large possibility of customers. So that started us on the journey of solving the problem, which we ultimately, well, it wasn't quite a problem, but seeing the opportunity that existed for Ebates to take advantage of.
Yeah. So what's interesting for our younger listeners is the internet had taken hold, and there were startups everywhere. So everything was going .com at the time. And if you were standing on the sidelines, you kind of felt like a chump because you're and so I'm in the capital markets helping these guys go public, right?
Yeah.
And it was nuts. So there were business plans that the ink hadn't dried, and they were getting venture capital.
There were some very fascinating examples of companies that got funded that, in retrospect, obviously was fanciful at best, business models that were ethereal at best. I think that one of the things for Ebates, and we can kind of touch on exactly what our business model is when you'd like, but one of the things that Alessandro and I were very adamant about was that we had a way to actually make money. This was a venture that ultimately was going to be profitable. Back then, a lot of the companies were all about gaining eyeballs, as we were to an extent as well, of course, but a lot of it was the growth and the valuations of companies that were in the private markets, as the private equity markets at the time, were definitely being valued on how quickly you can ramp, how many people you can get to your site, and we'll figure out what to do with them later. So you had many companies that, in my opinion, were not thinking past that point. Sandro and I think being attorneys and having limited business experience, I think maybe we approached it a little bit with a layperson's eye of, well, I'm going to start a business, it's going to make money. And it just seems radical at the time, but that was something that we really focused on, and something that saved us when the world exploded in April of 2000 when the bubble burst, and that really helped us.
So maybe you should talk about the customer and how you were serving them.
Sure. So what we realized was we wanted to do a business to consumer play. We were not retailers. So we realized that there'd be a tremendous cost if we wanted to actually physically, whether it was produce a product or be a middleman for a product, we're going to have to be stocking inventory. We're going to have to be dealing with the logistics of that, all those type of things that we felt, look, we're just two guys. What's the best thing that we can do? And so those were the parameters that slowly started funneling down. And it was on a ride home, actually. I was with my wife and my then, oh God, how old was Jack then? Jack was like a year and a half old. And we were coming down to Southern California, which we would do every year for Christmas. And I was on the 5 freeway. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and we're getting that white line fever. And I kind of hit on this basic premise of, well, what if we acted as an intermediary between merchants and the consumer, and we're able to incent them to keep coming back through our website by giving them something back? And the first iteration of that idea was, I was thinking, would be like a point system, something that they would come to our website, they'd click through to a merchant, and we would give them points, and maybe it would be something that was like, airline miles or whatever. And I immediately realized that this might be a decent idea, and we got into Fullerton at about where my mom still lives, actually, in probably about 1 a.m, and I called Sandro up, and I said, "Dude, I think I've got this. I think this might be a good one." And we tweaked it, and I think Sandro's suggestion actually was actually, why don't we make it, just forget this kind of conversion process, let's just make it cash back. And so that was the impetus for it. How we ended up implementing that became something that was controversial a little bit.
How so?
Well, so at the time, you have to understand how companies were advertising. It's important for background to understand Ebates is to understand how companies were advertising at the time. And the way the internet in this fledgling days was doing advertising was like publishing. Was literally a publishing model. In the way magazines or newspapers, if they still exist, were actually doing it was, if you had a subscribership of 100,000 people, they would charge you based on that number divided by 1,000, usually is what it was. So those are called CPM, impressions per 1,000. And so it might be $35 per 1,000 impressions. But of course, you never knew if those people were actually seeing your product. And back in the day, these were all banner ads is what the main term was. Now you see stuff a little bit more complex than that, but that's really ultimately what it was. So you would go to a website that you might be interested in, let's say a fly fishing site, and there'd be a banner across the top advertising Amazon or Nordstrom or what have you. And maybe you saw it, maybe you clicked on it, maybe you didn't matter, but the person was being charged, the merchant was being charged to display that ad, even if there was no actionable item for that particular ad. Amazon actually was the first to come up with a model that was called the affiliate model. And basically, in a nutshell, all they did was they said, you know what, why don't we contact these small sites like John's web fly fishing site, and we'll say you'll become an affiliate of ours, and we'll give you a special little HTML link, and you can display a little banner on your website that says, come to Amazon to buy books for fly fishing. And again, Amazon was not a huge name then. It was still gaining traction. And the advantage of that was, if you were John's site, if somebody clicked on that link and went to Amazon and bought $100 worth of product, you would get 5% or some percentage of that as a commission, much more than you would normally get, especially as a small site, from just a CPM-based thing when you were part of a network. From the merchant side, it made a ton of sense because it was pay for performance. You were only going to pay for your advertising if, in fact, it converted to an actual buyer. So, great idea. From Amazon's perspective, that was a customer acquisition tool. Right, a one-time customer acquisition cost. Because if you go to John's fly fishing site and now you see this great website called Amazon, you click on it, you buy something. Next time you want to go looking for books, you're not going to go back to John's fly fishing site, click on the link, then go buy a book, and they would have to then pay John's fly fishing site their commission on whatever you bought. No, Amazon viewed it as a one-time customer acquisition cost. What we realized was we could flip that and basically say, why don't we basically give that commission to the end user? They'll then be incented to keep coming back through our site each time as a preliminary click to the ultimate merchant destination, and they'll be getting free money in essence. That's really, to this day, which is now, we'll talk about the acquisition, but to this day, that is the essence of Ebates as a cashback website. We started giving back all the commission, and we're just doing on advertising dollars and so forth, just from the eyeball model. But we always knew we could turn that knob whenever we wanted to. And so when the internet crashed and venture money dried up and we had to get to break-even cash flow very quickly or disappear, we started doing like a 50-50 red split or model, what have you. Yeah.
You know, what's brilliant about this in reflection is, of course, that makes financial sense to do the rebate. But it also, and this is Professor JJ talking now for a second, but that's gamification. So it makes it fun, right? So, and here's a dumb example of another type of gamification. So you have a choice of airline, right? And so in my case, I'm a million-mile flyer, and I went with American, and I would get points every time I flew, and then I could trade those in on upgrades, right? Mm-hmm. And so they got my business, baby, except when I was going to Singapore or something like that. So gamification is now just the way it's done on the web today. So everybody is not only fighting for eyeballs,
yes,
but they're trying to figure out how are we going to keep these people engaged, right?
Yeah, engagement is an absolute big part. It was really fascinating that we found we had the amazing amount of data you can collect, right? We were able to break customers into cohorts, and we would have cohorts from the time the acquisition happened, I think in 2014, we would look at cohorts from 1999, and they were still a very active group of users. It was stunning the amount of the lifetime value we were able to get from customers at Ebates was one of the things that really made the company ultimately very valuable. Was we were not only able to mine that data, we were able to, in many ways, predict future behavior from the consumer, and that is gold in the retail business. So we could go to a merchant ultimately and say, hey, look, I've got millions of users here. I can turn this fire hose of users to your location, because ones that go to your place might also go to Nordstrom, might also go to Land's End, and we can track that and tell you with some certainty when they get to your site what percentage of them will buy something. And we had black and white data that showed that users that we sent to merchants bought at a significantly higher rate than their generalized traffic that came to the site. Stuff we didn't anticipate, quite frankly. I mean, I never knew that would actually happen, but it really was a value proposition for the company that ended up being very lucrative.
Yeah, it's interesting. From the branding experts on the consumer product side will talk about how there are times in people's lives when they will adopt a brand and they'll basically connect. And one of those, college students, please listen, is in your early 20s and alcohol. And so the alcohol brand...
Stunning surprise.
They know this. Now, they can't advertise on campus, but they use a technique called brand ambassadors. And it's usually the ASI president, club presidents, and things like that, to get them to go to the local pub where the beer is having a promotion, right? Because they figured out that once you connect with that 20-something with the brand, and in this case it's beer, you got them. You got them for years, decades even.
Well, you're seeing that now obviously with influencers, right? So you have people, whether they're Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, whatever, people that are deemed influencers that are making successful careers basically plugging brands. It was interesting. I was very cynical of branding experts, and we dealt with many of them during our years at Ebates. It's kind of I guess it's a science kind of, but it really ended up being true that the branding actually is a very important part of a product. It was one of my learning experiences going into the business, not having done it before. I was very skeptical of that. I'm a skeptical guy anyway, so when I have somebody kind of throwing this stuff at me, I'm ready to go into cross-examination mode. But it actually is a useful endeavor, branding, and it's an important part, I think, for pretty much any company.
So you Sandro is the way you...
Yeah, we call him Sandro. Sandro has many nicknames. Skeeter's his other one, but Alessandro is Alani. Sandro is what we call him.
Sounds like someone from Mississippi, Skeeter. So you moonlighted your way into this then?
Kind of did at first, yeah. I mean, we were both full-time prosecutors at the time, and we were doing this on our off time. And even when I came back from Christmas vacation into early '99, and we started really kind of spinning and like really taking this idea and starting to run with it. Yeah, we were both still full-time prosecutors for several months, and we were doing this at night and on weekends. And the time came where we started getting some traction, especially with our first investor, which was Foundation Capital in Menlo Park. great guys and women. They were one of the early investors in Netflix, Cisco Systems. They were pretty much the real deal, and very supportive. And they gave us some seed money early on. And it was after that was like, all right, I got to quit my job and give this a shot.
So what was it like for the two of you? You were prosecutors, attorneys, and you got this great idea for a business, and then you were pitching the professional investors. How did they react to your qualifications?
Well, it was really interesting. So again, being very new to that entire world, I had this vision in my head that it's all about the product. It's 100% the product. I could be coming and drooling on myself, but if I had some great product, they're going to fund me. And what I found out subsequently in becoming friends with a lot of these men and women in that business of doing venture was the team is as important, or the founders or the people that are going to start this thing up are as important, if not sometimes more important than the idea, that there are a zillion great ideas out there, but you have to convince them that you're the person or you're the team that can execute correctly on that. And so when I talk to young people or anyone who's going to do a startup and go look for money, I'm really adamant about the fact of, look, don't go in there and don't try to BS your way in there. They have great BS detectors. They're very good at sniffing out stuff that's not real, or puffery to an extent. Find your weaknesses and attack them. Go in there and face it head on. Address what you know they're thinking. So I knew going in there, they're going to be thinking, who the hell are these guys? I mean, they're two lawyers.
Exactly.
They're not technologists. They haven't, I'm a computer geek from way back, but that's different, right? Than actually being a coder. I mean, I dabbled in some C++ and stuff like that, but no, I'm not a real coder. And really very little track record. When I was here at Fullerton, I'm a proud graduate, 1987, the School of Economics. And when I was in school, I started a small company. I was working at a software store, actually, down here in Brea, which is now gone, Software Center. And I worked Friday through Monday and then went to school Monday through Friday. And I came up with a little idea for an audio device to hook up to an old Apple II computer, because I'm a gamer. I'm still a gamer from way back. And there was no sound that came out of your computer back then. Well, there was, but it was a small little 8-ohm speaker. So I devised this little device that you could hook up and then connect it externally to your stereo system. And so we sold those and, it did okay, and then it died and whatever. But I had learned a lot actually about kind of starting that up. So I didn't really have much experience. And so I decided to address the elephant in the room, which was, look, I know that you're scared about giving me money because I don't have that track record. But what I can tell you is that being a prosecutor, in many ways, I think there's a very transferable skill. And the skill as a prosecutor is the way I framed it to them, because I'm also a history buff and a military history buff particularly, is that I said, it's like I'm hitting the beaches without air cover. That's what you do as a prosecutor. I'll come into on trial day, which would be Monday mornings for us. Now I might have 3 cases and they might all plead guilty. So now suddenly I don't have any cases. But my buddy who had 3 cases, 3 of them go. They're all going to trial, and they might be what are called time not waive. So you got to do them or they're getting released from jail. You can't continue them generally. And you get what's called a handoff trial. And so you'd get it, and you're literally sitting in the courtroom while the jury's coming in. You got to pick a jury while you're reading the case. You've never seen it before. And that, from my perspective, was a similar skill set. I said, look, I anticipate that I'm going to get hit with challenges that I've never seen, that I did not anticipate. But I can tell you, based on my experience as a lawyer and as a trial attorney, there is nothing that is insurmountable to me. So I will give it 100%. I will fight until I win. And that's the way I approach these type of things. And I think those are transferable skills to an entrepreneur. The other thing, and I think that resonated with them. And the other thing that resonated as well was, they told me this, one of the guys told me this years later, was the fact that we made it clear that if there were people that they were to find that were more qualified to run the company, put them in there. As long as I had my stock, I don't care. I'll sweep up, right? So I was a CEO from 98, well, when we started until about 2002. And then my wife and I decided to move back to Southern California because our kids were little, and she had an incredibly successful career up in the Valley as well. So we were able to, fortunately, both become full-time parents. And so I went over to the board of directors. Sandra took over the CEO-ship from 02 to about 07, 08. And then we brought in, and again, at that point, somebody's like, okay, who can take us to the next level? And we brought in Kevin Johnson, who just did a great job of taking us across the finish line. And so taking your ego out of it, I think, is a big deal because, in fact, years later, as I was saying, they said to me, we haven't had anybody tell us that they have no problem stepping aside even before the company starts. And I said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know what I don't know. So if you find somebody who's better doing this than I am, I will step aside, no problem. Fortunately, we didn't really come to that, but I voluntarily just decided to do a change of lifestyle. But
yeah, so as an investor at Titan Angels, you just hit the nail on the head because we look for people first, and it's character, intellect, it's experience, pedigree, but it's all wrapped up into that. And then the ability to translate who they are into effectively a value proposition of why they're the right people. Incredibly important. And well, reality is most entrepreneurs don't think that way. They think technology is everything, right?
Correct. And I think that one of the most important things in any company, and I'm a huge believer of this, it's the people. And I mean, it sounds horribly cliche-ish, but we at Ebates would not have become what we became without such tremendous workers that we ended up having there in the early days who were it's just great people. I mean, it was fun. I mean, trust me, it wasn't all puppy dogs and roses. There were times that it was just brutally difficult, especially when the markets crashed. But it was always kind of fun to me. It was just fascinating to run a company and to be at ground zero during the birth, in many ways, of the internet was, one of those things I'll always be grateful to have had that opportunity. It was, especially again for a geek, it was so fun to watch.
Neat. Well, let's put Ebates on pause for a second and let's talk about you. So let's go back in time. So what were you like as a kid?
Well, it depends on who you ask.
And by the way, I prefer the truth. Go ahead.
Yeah. I have no problem with that. I was not an athlete. I'll tell you that right now. I mean, I could play sports. I could fake sports. I could not fake basketball. I never tried it because of that. But I was kind of a thinking kid. I think I was always fascinated by technology. My grandpa was one of he was a pharmacist. This was in New York. We're originally from New York. And he was just enamored by all things technical. And this is now in the early 70s. And I remember to this day, he had, I think it was Magnavox made it. It was one of the first home video game consoles. This is 1972. You can look it up. I've seen it on the internet, actually. And you had these screens that you would put on the TV, like translucent see-through plastic, because the only graphics were two little dots that you would have these two controllers that you did. So I fell in love with technology very early. And so for me, the two things that I always loved was that, and I loved theater. I did drama stuff. I did plays.
No kidding.
Yeah, I always thought that that's kind of what I would end up doing, which is why I loved being a trial lawyer, right? Because you got 12 people that they got to listen to you. they can't leave. They're stuck in the courtroom with you, and I get to perform.
So this is during high school?
I did high school, yeah. I'm a local guy. I went to Sunny Hills High School, where I graduated here in Fullerton, and did plays there, and student government stuff, and was not really sure ultimately what I wanted to do. I didn't think I'd be an attorney. I mean, people always said, oh, you love to argue, you love to do stuff like that. I mean, I was always an arguer. I argued everything. So there was that aspect. I was also I actually did a little bit of entrepreneurship. My mom always teases me about this. I sold snow cones in the dead of winter in New York. I had a snow cone machine, and I would set up. Makes tremendous sense. I think they got it for me for Christmas or Hanukkah. I don't remember which one it was, but I sat outside in the snow selling snow cones. Luckily, my business acumen got better later on. So so I mean, it was kind of. For me, it was all kind of preludes to what ultimately became my two careers, which were law and then entrepreneurship. And the computer ended up being really, for me, when we got our first computer, it was 1970. God, was it 78? It was an Apple II 16K with a cassette recorder is what you stored your programs on. And we had a friend of the family who was getting divorced. He dropped it off at our house, and I just fell in love with it. I got sucked down that rabbit hole. And that's, to me, really ultimately was what drove me to ultimately do Ebates, really, was that early love. And I stayed with it. I was a game player. I still am, actually. So I'm still very big into gaming.
So for the gamers there, what do you enjoy?
I'm very excited. I'm going to really, my son's going to be laughing if he's listening to this, because I've gone down the recent rabbit hole. I'm very excited about Half-Life Alyx coming out, which I was a big Half-Life fan. So it was the first game that Valve Software is putting out in like 10, 12 years. It's virtual reality. So I've been messing around a lot with virtual reality stuff. It's really interesting. Flight sims has really been my passion all throughout my life. I started on flight simulators in 1978. Even now, I built one in my home. I have a 6 Degree of Freedom flight sim that I do for real flight training now because I'm a pilot now. And so flight sims were always a big part of my gaming. But that first-person shooters, though, again, my son crushes me at those now. But that was a big day. Back in the day, actually, a funny story, at Ebates, we used to have Unreal tournaments. An Unreal Tournament was one of the first multiplayer shooters. And we would have them around the company. And Sandro and I would crush people. And it was really funny because we had like younger people, but Sandro and I had been playing it for years. But and then we moved out to California in 75 in Tustin, where I actually currently reside now, and then to Fullerton, where my mom still is. And that's how I ended up, one of the reasons I was at Cal State Fullerton.
And you were an economics major?
I was an econ major. Yeah, I started undeclared. First couple of years, wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And then settled on economics. The business department was horribly impacted. I wanted to get out in something under a decade. I did it in 5 years. But I loved econ, absolutely loved econ. And it really, I think in many ways, thinking and the things that economics taught me here about how to approach problems, how to do evidence-based arguments, things like that were all a great foundation for things I ultimately did.
Yeah, we share a passion there, and I think we had some of the same professors, by the way. Jim Dietz.
That was right. You mentioned Dr. Dietz. I remember him.
So this is a kind of idiosyncratic here, but so I was one of his students his first year teaching. So he had super long hair and this big beard, radical economics, and it just really resonated with me. So
I loved him. I had some great professors here. It was a great time. I look back very fondly at my time at Cal State Fullerton. That's when my wife and I met. So back in '84.
I did not know that. Yeah. Okay.
So we've been together since 1984. So
congratulations.
Thanks.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. So returning to Ebates, so you and Zandra are full time. You've raised capital a couple of times, right?
Correct. Yeah, we had a seed round that the VCs said, "Hey, look, we want you to hit these metrics to see if this is actually something. Not only can you do it, but is it actually a viable idea?" And so they put some arbitrary numbers on the amount of users, the amount of commerce through the site, and so forth. And we immediately took that seed money, hired an outside engineering firm, which, let me tell you, back in that day was very difficult to do because the internet was really starting to explode and getting that. And I'll tell you how bad it was. When we rented our first office space, I actually had to give warrants, which are basically stock options, to the landlord just to let us rent, the privilege of giving them rent money. That's how crazy it was in the Valley at the time for getting space. It was nuts. You couldn't get anything.
Very cool. So when you reflect back in the startup, so you talked about some things that really made you happy, your culture, the people, things like that. Let's flip it. What was the ugly part, the part you didn't like?
I hated firing people. I really did. And we were fortunate we didn't have to do it too often. We had to do some layoffs when the markets crashed in April 2000, but we ran a pretty lean company. Sandro and I were adamant of the fact that it wasn't our money, so we treated it like that and took it very seriously. So we were not, we had very, very bare bones offices where other companies that were equally funded were making these ridiculous lobbies and the vanity signs.
Yeah,
it was insulting to me.
I recall visiting companies during that era, and you knew who you were working with by the lobby. I mean, they were VC backed, and then they had this palatial lobby. What in the hell are they doing? How can their investors allow that?
Yeah, I was always a little bit surprised that some did. That's a whole other story. But so we were fortunate we didn't have to lay off that many people, and over time there's just things that come up and that you just have to terminate people. I hated doing it, but you had to do it. The other part was. It was just so stressful. You have a lot on your shoulders because that there are people that it's their livelihoods. They have families, and your decisions of what you're doing with this company is going to affect not just you and your future, but people that are working for you. And we took that seriously, and so. Those were tough. I mean, there were many, many, many sleepless nights through those early days. There's so much heavy lifting in the early days of a startup, of just getting the ball rolling and getting that momentum up. So for me, those were, I think, some of the hardest times. And then, of course, when the markets crashed in 2000, it's hard to explain unless you were there what it was. It was like a nuclear winter. I mean, it was just. Everything went dark. And I'm watching companies all around us that are run by supposedly smarter people than me and Sandro, and with a lot more experience, and they're just going under left, right. And it was a scary, scary time. Because we knew this was our shot. Sandro and I had always said, this is it, man. I mean, the odds we're not going to, what else are we going to do? Right? I mean, we'll go back to law, which is fine. I mean, I love being a criminal attorney. But we knew that as far as the technology space, that we felt that this was our chance, and we had to take advantage of it.
Yeah. So that living with the fear of failure is a common story, and you touched on the burden of leadership. That's very interesting. And in fact, I have talked with many people, and I've experienced some of it myself, where the bigger the company, the more the people, the more you worry about the employees, and because that's their livelihood, right?
Correct. You do worry about it. But there were so many interesting things that I did learn through this process. One is, and I tell this to all young entrepreneurs, you can do this. Don't let anybody tell you. You'll run into so many people in the business world. I ran into this in the legal world as well, that you have this view going forward that people ahead of you are so much smarter than you and are so much more capable than you. In the law, my big wake-up call were judges. You have this view before you go in, the judges, that they are because all through law school you're reading about literally Learned Hand, that was his name, a Supreme Court justice, all these very these renowned judges through the years who had these very impact on the law, and so I at least always thought that when I got there, that's what these people were going to be like, and then you start working with them and you realize not all of them. I mean, there are some good judges for sure, but there's a pretty good percentage that are hacks. That are, I mean, like literally either political sycophants that got the position and were appointed to it, or were not really the best lawyers in the world and are sitting on the bench. And, you can't name names, but every one of your friends who were in the office at the DA's office, we all knew who those people were, and you still know who those people were. So when I got into business, it was very similar. I felt like, wow, look at these captains of industry. They're all going to know so much more than I do. And then you get in there and you're like, everybody's just faking this. Yeah. It's not everybody. Again, same thing, right? There are people that are unbelievably skilled and great and trained at what they do. My point just being that because you don't have the experience, that literally is all they have on you is experience often. And you need to keep that in your mind when you go through it. You have to have confidence in yourself, confidence in your abilities, and only realize that the only thing those people who've seemed so successful have on you often is just experience. So stick it out, be tenacious, you're going to be okay.
There you go. Great message for our aspiring entrepreneurs. So you made an interesting personal and career choice where you were in an operating role and you said, nope, I'm going to go to the board. Can you just touch on that a little more?
Yeah, and so for me, what it was this was a total personal decision. This wasn't any like, oh my God, Paul, you need to step aside. You're not doing well. We were fine, right? We're getting the company's chugging along just okay, and we're getting through this crisis of the internet bubble bursting. For me, what it was honestly was I was incredibly fortunate because of my wife's career. And so Sutton, my wife, who I mentioned we had met here, also went up to the Valley about 6 months before I did. She graduated in 86. December 86 when her classes ended, but she walked with me in 87 at graduation. But she went up there early to get involved in the high-tech business because she had a family member who had been involved in it. And she thought, wow, for a woman, this is probably my best shot at an egalitarian environment. I mean, that's clearly open for debate, but more so than some other industries. And so she, on her own, just went up there and just had an incredibly successful career in the computer networking business, did a whole bunch of startups that got acquired by Cisco Systems, and she was a rock star. And so when the early 2000s came around and we had diversified our portfolio before the market crashed, we were very fortunate that we could kind of do what we wanted at that point. And so I saw the opportunity of being able to raise my kids. And that was, to me, it's like, look, how much money do you need ultimately? Mm-hmm. If I have this gift of being able to watch my then really young kids grow up, I did not want to look back in 20 years and say, why did I miss that? So that was the main decision, really. And so I went to the board and Sandro, and I told him that. I said, look, this is, I know it's kind of a tough decision. I didn't see this coming, but this is right for me and my family. I would absolutely want to stay involved with the company. I can do that on the board level. I can assist Sandro, remotely if I need to, whatever I need to do to work not only the transition, but going forward, I'm all in. Right? I mean, I love this company. I love the people here. I love the board. I was also, as an aside, I'll say this about our board of directors. We were also really fortunate that our investors, we had the primary capital investors were Foundation Capital. Paul Kuntz was on our board. August Capital, which was Dave Marquardt and Andrew Anker and David Hornick. Were the people who rotated through over time. And at Canaan Partners was Eric Young. And they were incredibly supportive all through the years. I mean, this is a long run for a venture-backed company, right? We started in 99, technically, is when we launched, and we didn't sell until 2014. So that's 15 years.
That's a long time.
Long time for a venture company, especially in the internet space. And we're literally we consider ourselves an Internet 1.0 company. And so you had these guys who supported us all the way through, didn't pull their money when, didn't shut us down during tough times. And we were a linear growth company. We were not an exponential growth company at the beginning. And so I basically said, this is kind of what I want to do. And they were supportive. A lot of these people were family people. They understood my decision. They realized that it was not made flippantly. I gave it a lot of thought. And I don't regret it. I mean, it cost me a lot of money ultimately, I'm sure, because of the stock refreshes I would have gotten as a CEO, but worth every penny of it.
Yeah. So as the company thrives, you start looking at a public offering. You're going to do an IPO.
Correct. Ebates at that point, this is now under Kevin Johnson's leadership, who was our CEO at the time, started to really hockey stick. We what we called hitting critical mass. Right? We were always growing. We were always profitable from early on, from 01, 02. We started either break even or profitable. So we were at the point where it's wow, we really have critical mass here. This is going. This is now post 2008 or 2007 when we had the Great Recession. Which we actually did. We weathered okay. Interesting thing about we learned also about a company that offers discounts. People still want to shop. Yeah. They're still going to do it online, and they're going to take advantage of literally free money. So we actually did pretty well during that period of time, or okay. And so we had filed the S1. Kevin was getting ready to do the roadshow. We had the bankers lined up, all that type of stuff. And I think our original evaluation, they were thinking, the bankers were telling us, from what I remember, it was like 650 to 700 million is what they thought we'd go out.
What were your sales? I was just curious about the multiple.
So I think So I think that, this is so long ago, but I think it was like a 15x multiplier over EBITDA, if I remember. But it's been
over EBITDA. Okay.
It's been a
All right.
while.
Yeah. All right.
But we were doing top line numbers at that point. I think we had at least reached $1 billion in sales through the site at that point in time. So we had a large amount of top line numbers coming through the site. And the way we counted that was if you clicked from Ebates and went to Amazon and bought $100 worth of books, that went to the top line number.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's not your true revenue.
Correct. Right. That's gross sales through the site.
Yeah,
right. And then we're getting a percentage of that plus merchant deals plus advertising, all that stuff. That's our top line revenue stuff. And then from there, we're taking out the cost of goods. And well, we almost had no cost of goods. It's mainly labor was the most part of it. And so that was all going. And then Hiroshi Mikitani, who is the CEO of Rakuten Corporation. And for your listeners who don't know Rakuten, they're a Japanese conglomerate. He's like the Jeff Bezos of Japan. He owns media companies. He owns I think a baseball team, and he really wanted to get a foothold into online presence here in the United States. And he had bought a couple of other companies. One actually down here in Southern California, Buy.com. He bought Buy.com. So anyway, so he came to our CEO and made an offer. And the CEO came back to us and at the board and said, well, this is what he's offering. It's an all-cash deal. It's, no stock, no nothing, just no hair, just here it is. And we all discussed it at the board and said, well, we need to tell him, thank you very much, we're honored, but we're about to go public, and that's not really that much of a premium over what we think is going to be the public offering price. So he went back to him, and then they countered and just said, how about $1 billion cash? And in the Valley, there's a thing called a unicorn. I'm sure people have heard of that. And a unicorn in the tech space was a company that truly is valued at $1 billion or above. Not a private equity company, but a public market, an actual somebody will pay $1 billion for it. And so from the board's perspective, it was a home run. It was like, here's this company that we're going to now turn into a unicorn. I was clearly thrilled and made that known that I was absolutely happy about selling at that point. And we did. We did the deal, and it was a complete buyout. So it was Ebates became a wholly owned subsidiary of Rakuten at that point. There were some of the key personnel that had contracts that would have to stay on for a period of time for the transition, but they were obviously compensated for that. But our board would be completely disbanded. And that would be the end of my involvement with Ebates, technically, from a financial aspect and an oversight or any type of governance aspect. And so I think the deal closed in like early 2015. It was like November 2014, early 2015, somewhere around that. And that was it. I mean, that ended what was ultimately a 16-year journey.
That's a very long path, too, because, most of the investors are hoping for their return in 5 to 7 years, right? So this was literally 2 plus 3x.
Correct. It was one of the way that people don't know the venture world, the way it works is they raise funds and they'll call it the Canaan Fund 1 or whatever that is. They'll give it some arbitrary name, and then they will go ahead and invest in companies out of that fund, and then they'll go raise another fund, the second fund, and they'll fund other companies. I think I can't say with certainty, but I can say with some probability that we were probably the last company that was either still existed in any of those fund pools for almost all of those investors at that point.
Right.
But they were happy with the exit.
Yeah, and the other thing, and I don't know the stats on this, and maybe I should, but an all-cash deal of that size, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, it was pretty. I think it was pretty rare as well.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons why I think we as a board decided, the markets are fickle. You don't know. We were hoping that we'd go public at $700 million, and then we'd ladder it up over the next couple of years and maybe get to $1.52 billion. So there are all these type of variables that are out there that you're gambling basically. You're making educated guesses. I shouldn't call it gambling.
Right.
And we decided that it just kind of made more sense at that point for the company to a bird in the hand, right?
Yeah.
So
I have kind of a whimsical question. So in reflection, as a prosecutor, as a entrepreneur, and yourself today, do you have something special, like a superpower or something that...
I was going to say, my only superpower, I glick really well. That was always like growing up, I always called that my superpower because I could lift my tongue up and shoot like venom out. But that was my only...
That's a little creepy.
I used to do that as a kid, so that was my superpower. But I think, gosh, that's a really interesting question. I would say that I'm really good at evaluating people. I've always considered that probably my best skill. It really helped as a lawyer and helps as a lawyer. I'm still an attorney. So I would say that I have a pretty good my wife would, I think, agree with me on this, that there'll be people in our lives through the years that I will peg immediately. Like,
so it's a snap judgment then?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it sounds a little bit arbitrary, and I guess it is, but I have found that, at least statistically, I'm very, very, very good at evaluating.
In that case,
people.
I'd like to apologize immediately. Well, I think that is kind of a mammalian trait where, as hunter-gatherers, we had to assess others quickly, and it's like a smell test or something like that, and I think that carries forward today to today's times.
Yeah, I found it it served me well.
Yeah, very cool. So if we got together again, let's say in a year, what would you tell me? What would have happened over the next year?
Well, that's really interesting.
That's my job, by the way, not answer, but ask interesting questions. So,
one of the fascinating things about retiring relatively young is trying to figure out what you're going to do. What's the next thing that you want to do? The company thing, it doesn't really interest me. I feel like I've kind of been there, done that, and doing two of those back to back would be kind of a long shot. I may have done some small things, but nothing of real note. So for me, going forward has been, what is my next thing? As I've mentioned, I've really plunged myself into aviation. Absolutely love it. I got my private, I got my instrument rating, I've done aerobatics. Absolutely love it. So that takes up a lot of time because if you want to do it safely, you've got to take it seriously, and I kind of treat it like a job. Thinking about teaching, that's something I kind of love. And I was fortunate enough, and I appreciate you. Thank you for inviting me to your class last week, and I enjoy speaking to students. I love the energy of students. It's so fun to see people that have not been beaten down by life yet, and so I really enjoy that aspect of it. So I may investigate doing something like that. Hard to say. Just kind of I'm very fortunate. I God knows I know that. And when you're fortunate enough that your wife's your best friend, we can do stuff together, and we hang out a lot and we fly places, and and it's all great. And my German Shepherd.
There you go. Right. Well, I'm a dog guy too.
What type of dog?
Oh, I've got we have 4 dogs in my family. So I've got a golden retriever, and we also have a Belgian Malinois, by the way.
Oh, they're good working dogs. I did Shih Tzu with one of my, which is like a sport, which is kind of like police dog training.
Yeah.
With my old Shepherd, and Malinois are very good at that.
Oh my God, they're
smart. High strung though.
He is so smart. He can open door knobs.
Mine does that too. I swear, mine does that too.
So we got to always remember to lock the door because the dogs are going to get in. So yeah. So, is there any question that I should have asked you or maybe you thought I was going to ask that I didn't ask?
Is a dog's mouth cleaner than a human's? I thought you were going to ask me that one.
It doesn't make any difference to me.
Yeah, so. I know. No, not really. I think you covered it. It's been. I think especially because you teach entrepreneurship, I think that the most important thing that you can really. I think that my biggest lesson learned is really, truly, and God, it sounds so horribly cliche-ish, but do not fear failure. You're going to fail at things. You're going to. And the ones who really do well just keep going. That tenacity is so important. So I think that out of all the things that I've learned and, going forward through my careers is, be damned what other people think, be damned what other people say, be damned what their opinions are. If you believe it, do it. and do what works for you, and don't worry so much about other people. I mean, that was my walk away from a lot of this.
Very cool. I think that's a great way to close our conversation. I wanted to thank Paul Wasserman, the founder of Ebates, prosecutor and husband and father, for joining us, a complete person. We'll see you next week, same time, and be sure to follow the Center for Entrepreneurship on fullerton.edu. Just do a search for entrepreneurship. And if you got the time, you can look me up, John Bradley Jackson, on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. So with that, we'll close and see you next week.